Welcome back to another fantastic episode of UAP Studies. I'm joined by Louis Borges. Louis, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing really good, brother. How are you?
I'm doing very good. We got a fantastic guest today. Michai Morin is joining us. And basically, we're just going to get right into it, if that's okay with you, Michai.
That sounds great.
Great. So basically, tell us just a little bit about yourself. We'd like to know, basically, when we have somebody on, what is your experience with UAPs as a kid? What got you into the subject? Because it is still kind of a niche subject right now, a small community, but a community that's growing nonetheless. So without, further ado, if you will,
Yeah.
teach us a little bit about your background.
Well, thanks for asking. I don't generally talk about, my youth and interests preceding to today. My childhood, I have high functioning Asperger's, and when I was a child, it wasn't a really documented thing. I'm sure many other children had it as well, but it was just kind of seen as a mishmash of odd behavior. And naturally, I was very introverted. I was inclined towards science and mathematics. I always had a propensity to try to understand how things work, and that's kind of led me to where I am today, is this endless fascination to how things work mechanically, physically, socially, and on and on and on. And through that sort of experience, you start to learn more things about the universe and how the universe operates at fundamental levels. And it's a really interesting topic for me. As a kid, I loved taking things apart. I was always fascinated with space. I wanted to be an astronaut to the extent that I ended up, studying science and physics and really dove into astrophysics. I started college early. I even took flying lessons. My father had planes. He was a ranger in the Green Beret and had retired and carried on his interest in flying and had planes. So we flew together and I took lessons, hoping one day I could join the Air Force or Navy and work toward becoming an astronaut. Unfortunately, due to not only my, I guess they call it a disability. I don't consider it as such personally for myself, but also I'm colorblind. So
that doesn't help. No, not for flying. Yeah.
That derailed my plan quite substantially. So I left college and I kind of backpacked Europe and the Middle East for a while, and then came back to the States, and then lived as a young adult. In that time, I found I had a knack for understanding trends based on my knowledge of science and technology. I could see where things were heading, and eventually talking and meeting new people, I was giving advice, and that turned into advisory roles. And then from there, I met other people and I started doing consulting. And so it all kind of grew upon itself. I started a consultancy where we specialize in helping new tech ventures and science ventures procure funding. So what happens is you have a lot of these startups who have disruptive technologies or services, but they lack the knowledge of how to navigate the financing world, or don't understand how to market their product or service. And what my business does is we help them get to that point. And that's actually how I met Deep and Ryan Graves. And so, yeah, that's what I do with my company. On the side, I do a lot of these podcasts. I do tech talks discussing futurism, automation, AI, topics like that, trend analysis. I also do private consulting for executives and administrative teams for companies. And that's more depending on situational. So if it's a specific product or service they're looking at, or they're looking at where a market might be in so many years, we sit down and look at the data. So that's what I do professionally. I enjoy these topics because I've always had a knack and interest with the phenomena. I never had any UAP related experiences as a child. I did have interesting experiences that were non-scientific because I couldn't explain them scientifically, more serendipitous or coincidental to the extreme.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. However, I haven't told anybody this except for two other people and my wife. But there was I did have an experience 6-8 months ago. I was sleeping quite soundly with my wife, and I was having this really, really vivid dream that I was in a UAP craft, and we were, sounds insane, we were flying through the cosmos, and they were showing me this immense battle that was occurring, and then they were showing flash. I say they, it was this formless kind of being entities. In my subconscious, I kind of labeled them as quote unquote aliens. And I'm not saying this occurred.
Right.
I'm just saying this is what I dreamt. And very, very vivid, almost lucid. I don't know if you've ever had a lucid dream. I've had a few in my life, not many, but I know what a lucid dream is. It's when you're consciously aware and you can actually control the outcomes of your dreams, which are great. I've always wished I could have had more. But the reality in this dream was at lucidity level. I couldn't control it, but it was so real that it could have been reality. Anyway, I woke up at a start because I heard a noise and I was just soaked with sweat. And I have a off-network alarm system in my house, which means that it's not connected to any outside network. For security reasons, I do a lot of NDA stuff and I have to maintain a certain level of security. Anyway, my panel was completely lit up. So that means every sensor had been triggered at the same time because they were blinking in sync with each other, which up until that point had never occurred. And again, this could be coincidental that it occurred with this strange dream I had. But I had this compulsion not only to appease my wife, who was like, what the hell is going on? I also felt like I had to check on, my house. So I got up, put on my robe, and kind of poked around the house. And I had this compulsion, which has never happened before, to go out my back door and not look around at ground level, but look up. And I looked up at the night sky and I didn't see anything of interest until one of the stars in my periphery kind of just faded out. And I looked back, and where that spot was just an empty void. That experience was probably one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. And your viewers can take it as it is, a series of strange coincidences, perhaps. I have no idea. It's an interesting story nonetheless, and that's really my only occurrence with the phenomenon that I'm aware of.
Do you have any sensation of being pulled or rush of being pulled, upwards or downwards really fast? Like, have you had any of those sensations?
Before I woke up, I felt like I was thrown at a tremendous velocity into my bed. Obviously, that didn't happen. Otherwise, I would have gone through the floor. But I
Right.
did have that physical sensation of being just, I guess, like just we're back into my conscious awareness, and I woke up and laying on my back, just soaked with sweat, and my sensor panel going off. So it was a strange instance, and it feels funny to share that. I've held that quite privately up
No,
until
but
this
thank you
point.
for sharing. That's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what this is all about, right? And having talked, Louis and I having talked with a few of these past abductees like Kathleen Martin, that sensation is something that is occurrent in abductions, that people feel that sensation. So that's curious that it happened to you as well. Yeah.
It could be from my recollection of learning and hearing others, and somehow I wove that into my subconscious narrative. I'm not sure. I hesitate to say that I was abducted because I have no evidence of such. I
Right.
have no physical markings. I have no memories other than my very vivid dream. Again, we'll leave that up to your viewers.
Nice.
Yeah.
And on the subject of UAP, so what got you initially interested in the subject? Because before this point, you've never really had any
Yep.
sightings or anything like that you mentioned as a kid. So something must have triggered that
Yep.
interest for you.
So I've always had a cursory interest in the topic, mostly stemming from technological capabilities. I wasn't so much interested in the nuances, the spiritualism, consciousness. I mean, that's always been a topic that's interested me, but it was really the technology. I mean, that's at the heart of what I do. It's at the heart of my core interests. And so during one of my meetings, wasn't during, it was after a meeting I had. When I started my career, I worked with a couple aerospace companies. I thought I was doing amazing in my career. Here I was finally getting the big contracts and working with these aerospace and defense companies. And anyway, after one of the meetings, you occasionally will just casually shoot the shit with some of the other people who were present. Back then, this was pre-COVID, so we actually went to location. Um, and more than once, I had spoken to people who relayed not just interests, but firsthand accounts of technologies relating to the phenomenon, which obviously that I found that very fascinating. I've always been interested in researching electrogravitic field generation, field propulsion, because that's honestly, that's not pseudoscience. I know a lot of people, don't trust the science there. There's a tremendous amount of legitimacy in electrogravitic propulsion. The science says so, the physics say so, the engineering could, it is certainly possible. We don't have the power distribution or storage capabilities at present, public knowledge, to generate voltages that would be required to have such an effect. That does not mean it's impossible. So I've always been interested in researching it. And then just having a talk with one of these engineers who's later years, who's, I would say, mid to late 60s. So he had been around for a long time. He probably should have retired a long time ago. But he was telling me he had worked for these other companies. So in the aerospace sector, what's happened over the last 40 years has been a tremendous amount of consolidations, patent trading, IP hoarding. So all the companies that exist now are really conglomerates of aerospace companies that were around prior. So this goes back to the early 1900s, the mid 1900s. And so this guy had worked at a couple other companies, and he started telling me some things that I found extremely interesting because it had actually correlated with some of the research. I read a lot of scientific publications that are really dry, really boring, that really don't make the light of day. Sometimes because they're so out there that people just don't want to touch them from the scientific or intellectual community. But he had made a statement that I told somebody recently. He told me to follow the Mercury, and at the time, I didn't realize there was such a breadth of information on Mercury relating to the phenomena. So naturally, I went back and started my research on that topic, and I started to see some interesting patterns and started to look up research pertaining to high vertice Mercury, different types of vaporized Mercury, and some of the effects that occur from that. And they correlate with a lot of these gravitic strangeness that we see from the phenomenon. And then you start to see historic accounts pertaining to Mercury being either A, associated with the phenomenon, or B, somehow being collected by governments. So we saw the Nazis were extremely interested. After the war happened, we were finding U-boats filled with mercury. And some people have claimed that the mercury is used for industrial use. Sure, but you don't need mercury in the amounts that we were finding. And certainly you wouldn't have that as top priority on some of the best U-boats hidden away and kind of found in all sorts of areas, Argentina, Antarctica, I think somewhere in the Philippines as well. So there's this interesting relation to Mercury, and this guy turned me on to it. And that kind of started my whole analysis. I started to look at the phenomena as a trend. So I looked up the history, and then I don't know if you saw my presentation on Project Unity's podcast, where I kind of detailed and outlined the last 5,000 years of UAP historical accounts in chronological order. If you haven't seen it, please take a look at it. It's really has a lot of information that I was able to collect. And what
I would
that
say
showed,
5,000 years. That's quite a bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the pattern is there. There's just a statistically significant pattern of observation. So what that means is the written and oral accounts that were recovered, and all the references I use are cited and shown in the presentation so people can review it. And Jacques Vallée had several, but I expanded upon that. And what it shows is there's a clear significance in what is being observed over the course of 1,000 years, up until the last 100 years, when the observations get more muddled. And I think that's primarily due to the purposeful obfuscation of governments trying to control the narrative, which didn't happen circa 20th century. So everything before that is almost more legitimate in terms of accounting of what is being seen than to today, where people have alternative means and reasons to portray UAP and the phenomenon.
When you mention anti-gravitic devices and things like that, it reminds me of what Lou Elizondo came out with, the, quote unquote, 5 observables: positive lift or anti-gravity, instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities, low observability or cloaking, and transmedium travel. It doesn't seem to matter if it's air or space or water. Some of the things the Navy has caught, anything that's going 400 or 500 miles an hour underwater is like double the greatest torpedo that we know exists, right? And, it's a lot more viscous being in water medium. And, we know the challenges of going deep, because that's why we haven't really explored much of our ocean, it's just such a hostile and almost impossible place to go. Yeah. So like, do you have any thoughts on the other observables? You mentioned anti-gravitic technology, but can you contribute maybe to some other parts of that?
Yeah, they're all attributed to electrogravitic field generation. So all of these observables are natural byproducts of extremely high and intense electrogravitic fields, or at least that's what is theorized based on actual physics models of what would occur with these gravitic fields. So you would have transmedium travel no problem, because the bubble that surrounds the craft or object doesn't, it isn't interacting with the physical world as we know it. So there is no friction, there would be no sound, there would be no difference between traveling through water or air, other than water has a higher density perhaps. It still wouldn't matter, perhaps pressure, but I don't think so. Enough voltage could overcome any obstacle. So you'd have bending of light, which is that's also a product of it. So when you are looking at these bubbles in space-time, space-time would be our skies, for example. So let's say we have a craft operating with electrogravitic field. Propulsion is also a byproduct, because it's not being propulsed, it's slipping. It's slipping through our space-time. So space-time is it sounds nuanced and pseudoscience only by definition, but that's how you would accurately describe it. And so as they slip through our reality or space-time, any light waves would just bend right around it, unless they alter the frequency or voltage of the field to allow some visual change in dynamic. Or if another byproduct could be glowing. We talked about that last time, the ionization of the air around it just from the strong field. And as our atmosphere is made up of different gases, the color, the ionization would naturally change. Also the Doppler effect. There's a number of reasons why the color could change, aside from choice. It could be they're simply just a choice, why they choose to have different spectra emitting from their craft.
It's like a neon light. You put neon in a tube, you charge it, and you get a certain color. But if you were to use, nitrogen or some other gas or some combination of gases, that's how you could vary the color just based on its elemental properties anyway.
Right. And I'm not an engineer or a physicist, so I just want to put that out there. So if I do make mistakes, your viewers hold me to a level that is understanding.
You mentioned propulsion, and what are your thoughts on, for example, like when you see the gimbal video, it doesn't seem to have any heat. It doesn't seem to have any control surfaces or evident propulsion. There is kind of a fuzzy, almost like an electromagnetic static or haze around it. Maybe that's the envelope that it travels through. But what are your thoughts on lack of heat? No sonic boom, no control surfaces, no propulsion. What do you think?
I think that obviously there's higher quality videos of that footage. Also, the way a bubble works is that no radiation, whether light or infrared or whatever, could be observed if the occupants didn't want it to be. So, if they're using infrared cameras and they didn't want to be seen, they would just use the ambient temperature around them. So what that's telling me is that this object A didn't care if it was being observed, so it had no sense of danger. Or two, it wanted to be seen in whatever spectra it was displaying or allowing to pass through. And those are the only options I can think of. Or three, it's illegitimate, which I don't believe that to be the case, just because I've spoken to some of the pilots that witnessed these crafts. So I know based on my own accounting that they are real. The gimbal footage, we need better spectra camera systems, because right now on the planes and other craft we utilize to perceive targets and threats, we mainly use infrared, visual, and not from my knowledge, I don't believe we use ultraviolet cameras much. Perhaps we do, but I think we really need to start focusing on extreme spectral imaging, which covers a much larger gamut of the visual spectra, or non-visual spectra for that matter. I think we should go from X-ray to ultraviolet and so on. That's the only way we're going to see these things. Also, we need to focus on high frequency gravity waves, because right now in astrophysics, what they do to perceive black holes is we have these very primitive, I say primitive, they're probably some of the most sophisticated instrumentation on the planet, but we look for low frequency gravity waves that are emitted from black holes or supernova or anything of that sort. So these crafts, as a byproduct of electrogravitic fields, they would be emanating, and I don't think you could subvert this. It's just a natural law of functioning in our universe, is that it would emit high frequency gravity waves, like little ripples in a pond, right?
Right.
And we're not looking for the little ripples, we're looking for the tidal waves. You'll never see a ripple if you're just focused on tidal waves. So I think the best approach that we could start to really pick these up, and I think we would pick them up quite quickly, is if we turned our focus on high frequency gravity waves.
Right. Because we're limited on what we can see. We're limited on what we can hear. If these things or these entities know our how we're made up, then they know how to hide from us, because they know certain lights we can't see, so they'll hide in that frequency. So yeah, it makes sense. They're probably a lot more prevalent through our airspace at all times than we actually assume that they are.
Yeah,
if they're hiding it
think they
within
are.
that. Yeah.
Mhm. I do think they are, and I think that they're, and I've used this. I always confuse analogy and metaphor, but I've always used this analogy that if you're a biologist and you're in the jungle and you're studying a primitive ape species, right? You want to stay hidden in the trees. You don't want to disrupt the life of the primitive species. However, if they see you, you don't really care.
Right.
They'd offer no immediate threat unless you're real close and they can physically attack you. But if you had a stun gun or something, they offer no threat. So if they
Right.
see you, big deal. In general purpose, you want to remain hidden, right? And I think
Right.
that's what we're observing with the phenomena. I think in practice they want to stay hidden. However, if whatever function they're doing creates them to have moments of perception, what do they care?
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. So, not like we can do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Jason and I were chatting about it last night before the show, and yeah, I understand you're a valued contributor and part of that group. And for those of our listeners,
I'm not a formal member. No,
but you're
I'm
part.
sorry if I misled you, Jason.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my apologies. I thought you were part of the coalition.
No.
Okay.
Do you want to cancel the interview?
No.
Tell us about it anyway. I'm intrigued, and most of our listeners may not have heard of it. So, what is it? What's its function? And is it making any progress?
It is. It's still in its infancy, so you have to, take it with a little grain of salt.
Sure.
But they're working on methodologies and creating a intellectual network to help research the phenomena outside of agencies, so outside of government oversight. This is more of public kind of domain research think tank group of individuals who are generally quite acclaimed in their fields, have overcome the fear of discussing the topic. They've removed the giggle factor, and they see it as a interest and pursuit of scientific endeavor, which it is. And that's, put simply, that's what they're doing. And they're right now they're still working on means and practice and methodology, instrumentation. There's a lot to do, with the eventual goal to wholeheartedly study the phenomenon in the best scientific possible way.
And actually, that actually leads me to a question, because I always discuss this, but get more intellects involved into the UAP subject. And so people like yourself, people like the Scientific Coalition, government officials. So what's it going to take for the rest of the intellect world to sort of start paying attention to this?
Well, you have to consider what intellectuals hold dear the most. What's the most prized thing an intellectual has? That's their credibility, right? Their credibility is their number one resource. It's their tradable commodity. And, up until recently, the risk versus reward on even coming close to the topic of discussion wasn't worth it. Wasn't worth risking your credibility in your specific or respective field. However, that's changing, thankfully. And that's changing because I think the interest in UAPs from the media is, they don't want to cover it any more than the government wants to cover it. However, media, it's a business, and a company can only get by on an unchanged product or service for so long. If the consumer market demands a change in the goods or services, a company would be foolish to ignore it. It just is bad business.
Right.
So when you have a consumer market, which is the general public who consumes the media, is now gaining an acceptance that the phenomena is in fact real, the media has to, drag its feet and come around to it and involve it into their product and service. This is general business with most monopolistic business mentalities. You're a car market. You don't want to change your process and the way you design cars. But if the consumer market is banging on the door and refusing to purchase cars because you're not adding a seatbelt or you're not, electrifying, the only way you can remain competitive is to heed to the whims of the market. And that's what media is doing. Right. So media is picking up on the UAP phenomenon and starting to cover it a little more. It's been slow. They still have the giggle factor, which is really hardwired into news sources. But so that's really allowing intellectuals to come out and feel okay about risking their credibility. The risk now is much, much lower. So the risk versus reward is now more balanced.
Right.
That might be some of the reason why you don't hear much from the Air Force. Navy seems to be more, forthcoming with information, videos, and whatever, but that stigma must still be there. I mean, if you're in the Air Force, you need to be a sharp thinker, battle ready. You're operating very expensive equipment, reaction times, all that. Airline pilots for years and years have said it's a big deal to bring that up. Can you imagine being a fighter pilot? You said risk versus reward. Either there's a big hush on the whole department, or it's just still commonly accepted that don't talk about this or you'll never fly again. The numbers would prove that anyway.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I would actually say that the level of ingenuity, intellectualism, talent actually exists in all the branches of the military.
Oh, for sure.
Yes,
for sure.
They do different things, The Air Force is traditionally more on information technologies, but the Navy certainly does its fair share of designing technologies. And I think the Air Force is more hush hush on it because I think they have a lot more to hide, to be quite frank. And I think the Navy, so this is my hypothesis. I'll put this out there. Do not take this as fact. Everything I'm saying here is just my hypothesis. It's my opinion. I have opinions based on years of thought about this subject, working professionally with some topics surrounding this. But I think that traditionally within the military branches, all of them, at the mid-management level, so we're talking captains, rear admirals, colonels, brigadier generals, no higher, and certainly no lower, that these secrets have existed. And why is it that I think that? It's because once you get higher in rank, you're more public, right? You're more public and you answer directly to other more public people. And when you're kind of sitting in that medium, not only do you have longer careers traditionally, and you also have a tremendous amount of authority within your given, division or whatever. I truly believe that's where a lot of these secrets are held. So when you have officials coming from these big branches of service and military saying, I don't know what the hell you guys are talking about. We don't have anything on here, because it's a built-in plausible deniability. It is intended to be that way, and has been that way for a long time. So this has been passed on for decades, this practice of utilizing the classification system as a means to maintain secrecy on the topic. And so what we have here, and I don't disagree that these congressional hearings and these senators and even officials, military officials, generals who have interests and can access it, I don't doubt that they have separate studies that they have kind of slapstick together to figure out what the hell is going on. Meanwhile, within their own branches, these secrets and this research is conducted, and it cannot be touched at all. Legally, it can't be. And it's just been operating in that kind of limbo of these branches, these captains, colonels, rear admirals, brigadier generals, and whatever, SSP or super black project. And they're tied closely with aerospace companies who produce the widgets that go into these kind of think tanks or research projects. And a lot of times these tech companies don't really even know what they're doing, right? They're told we have to produce this real sophisticated instrument or this real sophisticated material. The aerospace company knows the drill. Don't ask questions. You just do it and get paid a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
And the money comes from these black programs that don't have any accountability, that exist in this nether world, and they legally do so. So we can't sit here and say, these people are villains, they're criminals. They're operating within a legal structure that has been created over decades and decades to perpetuate this obfuscation through the classification system. I don't think that's right. And a lot of military officials also think that this process is broken.
Yeah.
But you can't really do anything about it. You can't just demand. So you say you have a 2-3-star general go to one of these colonels or brigadier generals who's been read in on these projects. They can't make them tell them, no matter what. It's against the rules and regulations of that branch. So the general would actually be the one who would be breaking the rules. And so that's how this stuff has remained hidden from Congress has been hidden from the administrations that have come and gone over time. And it exists in this real nebulous area. And I think that the senators now are really trying to devise who these gatekeepers are. Because a lot of time people will say, well, there's no grand government cover-up. You're right. There isn't. It's slightly more insidious.
Right.
It's not a grand cover-up in that the people at the top have no idea, and they've been trying to figure this out for decades, and they can't access that information. So they put together their own crappy little programs.
Right.
Right. They put together their own programs with limited information, and they're trying to get budgeted through, Congress, and trying to get these SAP titles on the program so they can get funding. But no congressman is going to be caught dead up until recently funding these programs. Thank Harry Reid.
Right.
So that's where I think it exists.
It's the accountability, right? There's nobody to hold accountable for the information or who owns the information.
It's designed that way.
Yeah, it's maddening.
It's very clever. When this was put together, I don't know. I suspect it was during the time of Eisenhower, to be quite frank. Maybe it was being constructed before him. But this means of classification really was a stroke of genius, the way they constructed this, because there's no way you can access it. There's no way that any military branch has to take accountability, because they have none.
Right.
They have no accountability because they don't know what's happening.
They use the term need to know as convenient as it needs to be used. And let's be honest, there's factions of people in the government, in the military. Yeah. They're not changing hands every time there's a new leader of the political party.
No.
People have 30, 40-year careers because that stuff is very top secret. They're trustworthy. They're one of a handful of people.
Correct.
You're not going to replace these people with any real frequency. So to your point of these secrets are locked up in that sort of generation, I 100% agree with that.
Yep. Yeah, I would say with certainty that's where it lies. And you get the Wilson memo leaks, you get senators, you get generals, you get presidents who say that they've been told they don't have a need to know. What no one ever asks is who
says.
Yeah.
Who says this?
Yeah.
Not people focus on the what and the why. No one ever says who. Who is telling you don't have the need to know?
Right.
And that's where I think the investigations are starting to find these. I refer to them as gatekeepers. You could call them whatever. I think that these gatekeepers are deeply entrenched. They have a lot of clout. They've probably spent decades developing defense tactics to any intrusion or incursion into their little world.
Right.
And that's not hard in the intelligence world. We all know, you can build a dossier on people who are looking into you and easily create some fictitious thing to either get them kicked out, ousted, bad press, throw them off. It's not hard. This is basic counterintelligence. This is not movie stuff. This is reality.
And even outside influences, like let's say the Cold War and trying to defend yourself against espionage, those tactics and things that they would have picked up and learned, they also infiltrate everything else in military as well. So whether it's the UAP topic or other classified stuff, they're using that same practice that has been tried and true for other times where it was important, war times or potential threat thereof. That's just how that has kind of, it's gone into everything. And that's why they're so good at it.
But it begs the question though, because we're talking about the gatekeepers, so they're still around. And now you have this new UAP task force that's supposed to be investigating this. Are they going to eventually cross paths at some point? There's got to be some sort of event that's going to take place where, the gatekeepers get there. Because, we hear about that incident on the ship, and 20 minutes later, a helicopter lands, civilian looking men come out, they grab all the tapes and take off again. So obviously there's already a group in place doing this stuff.
Yeah.
They weren't held accountable back then. Nobody knew who they were. Now you got the UAP task force that's going to be trying to do the same thing, but eventually something's going to happen. They're going to bump into each other, right? Because you got the old school guys that are still doing this, and then you got the new guys on the block trying to figure out what the hell's going on.
A turf war.
Yeah.
So this happened when early on, when the CIA and FBI were kind of one thing back in the day, right? So, God, the years eluding me, but there was a time when a lot of the same roles overlapped, and this was, I can't remember if it was before the CIA, I believe it was the OSS or OSA or something, and then eventually the CIA or FBI, they broke apart. But you see a lot of turf war that happens in these intelligence communities, and that's what's going to happen here. But you're going against an entrenched, deeply secretive militaristic and intelligence group who has decades and decades of experience in how to handle this and how to obtain it quickly and put the fires out rapidly. I suspect these committee members and chairs, while they have plausible deniability, because they really don't know what's going on. They put people there who've never been truly briefed on the deep and richness of the phenomenon. I'm talking going back, the last 100 years. They don't know what's going on, but I bet you they know who the gatekeepers are.
Right.
And they can't say anything because of the classification. So they're still tied. So it's this really strange kind of insidious knot within the military branches that is keeping more of the information from trickling up. I'm not saying that us as general people will ever get that information, but
Right.
It's keeping that information from reaching higher authorities on people that were voted in on, Right. So I don't know if the committees are really going to do anything but just bring more awareness to it, and they're not going to find anything, because I don't think it's in their interest to find anything. That's why this coalition is important.
Yeah, even we were commenting, we were talking to Jimmy Church on the last episode, and we were commenting on the video that they selected at the Congress hearing to show them what a video of a UAP is. And it was probably one of the shittiest videos they could have possibly selected, right?
It's intentional. Yeah, they also didn't edit the video clip to, frame when the object would be in it. That, this is a major hearing. They knew it would be publicized and viewed by millions and millions of people. It would be covered via media. And you're telling me that they didn't have the foresight? Our military, who's like one of the greatest entities the world has ever seen in terms of strategic foresight, didn't have the foresight to edit a video that is completely related to the topic of the commission hearing. Right. So that type of stuff shows me loud enough that one, they're not taking it seriously. Two, they have no real interest.
They're trying to downplay it. They're trying to make it seem like, hey, you guys wanted this hearing.
Yep.
Here's this grainy little video. And you see that was it, everybody. So
it's like one frame.
They have to admit that there is a phenomenon now. They have to admit it begrudgingly. Yeah. And they're going to do so in the manner that makes it look as benign as possible.
They're not going to subpoena people that they can't control and don't know what their answers are going to be. And they're not going to take Cletus from Oklahoma, who got abducted out of a cornfield, and put him on the stand, because you don't know what they're going to say. And that's dangerous. Like
Well,
you said, they have the
yeah.
foresight. They're not going to slip up and shoot themselves in the foot. It was staged, not staged in a bad way per se, but they knew we're going to discuss this. This is how it's going to go. They covered the bases before the thing got started, and they made sure that they kept as much of it on a not a big deal level.
Absolutely. And they picked people who find it interesting, but at the end of the day, their job isn't tied to the success or failure of whether or not this committee presents anything of note.
That's right.
It doesn't matter to them. So this is just a temporary step for their careers. And going back to what you're saying about subpoena, you can't legally subpoena these gatekeepers because they're doing their legal duty under the classification system, and you can't break that. You can't breach their security because you have an interest. At least not yet. They don't have the legal. That's what we really need JAG to really start attacking this system so we can get more information.
It's like you look at how compartmentalized the aerospace world is. The government's the same thing. Everything is in a box. You only have one piece of the puzzle, and there's very few people, like you call them the gatekeepers, very few that know the whole picture. And maybe, like you said, even presidents themselves need to have plausible deniability in the event of.
Absolutely. I think probably the last president who had probably the most access would have been George Bush Sr.
Yeah, because he was from the CIA, right?
Right, and he came from the earlier days when it was probably spoken about more open in the intelligence communities before it got compartmentalized away completely. He may have had a hand in how that was structured, but I'm not sure. I just my hypothesis. I think he probably was one of the last presidents who were more thoroughly read in on the topic.
Yeah,
and there's a reason, obviously, why they don't fill in any, presidents, as you mentioned, Louis. It's just they're short term. They're not going to be there forever, right?
They're also morons. I mean, let's be honest here.
They're just the puppet, really.
Yeah, I mean, come on. The last 4 or 5 presidents says everything. I think Obama was the most intellectually sound, but even him, like, he wasn't the best option in the United States to serve as a president.
Right.
So this is, this is what the political parties do. They present you with their option, not your option. It's their option for you to choose from. And it's always somebody who's, not going to really change the way things are done.
Yeah, keep status quo.
Do you think we're going to get to a point where politicians run campaigns based on disclosure, like mentioning, if I get elected, I'm going to really push for disclosure?
Well, Clinton tried that, and he said, like, if I get in, I'm going to make them tell me. And then even towards the end of his term, he's like, I asked, and they didn't tell me either. If they do exist, they didn't let me in on it.
Did he mention there's a government within the government and he doesn't control that? Like something along those lines? Like
several presidents have mentioned that. I mean, Kennedy.
Yeah, you get killed for
Reagan,
saying stuff like that.
Yeah, you do, for sure.
Jeez.
I don't think politicians will ever use that as their quote unquote platform. They may use it as one of their talking points. I think what we'll see pretty soon here is politicians campaigning on, I'd be real happy to see term limits used as a platform. But most of the time, it's the social points, the social talking points that really don't change the economy or how people's day-to-day lives is. They're just the emotional hot buttons that the populace likes to discuss. It's never anything. I mean, look at Andrew Yang. I believe he was probably one of the better presidential candidates, and they literally didn't cover him in the media. And when they did, they intentionally mispronounced his name, put up wrong pictures. Why? Because he didn't focus on the social divide. He focused on actual solutions to the
Right.
economy,
Yeah.
actual solutions.
We don't want that.
Well, it sounds negative, and it sounds pessimistic, and it sounds like I just hate government, but unfortunately that's the reality. This is the reality we've come to live in, and I don't blame any one politician for this, because it has been the creation of hundreds of politicians over the course of the last 50, 60 years that have created this environment. And so this is where we are. Money drives politics. What drives money? Corporate interests. What drives corporate interests? The interests of those who own the corporations.
Right.
Disclosure's got to come from the civilians, private groups, people. We chatted with Caroline Corey about her movie A Tear in the Sky, and one of the guys in the movie was David Mason, and he's like a genius. He took machines that can see a light in the sky, turn it into a waveform, and give it a unique identifier. So after a while, you're like, yeah, that's a 747. That we don't know what it is. So you have people that are now using their brains and getting money in the private sector, and doing their own research. And again, there's a lot of these experiments that bear fruit. You don't have to sit there for months and months and months to see something weird happen. So I think rather than waiting for the government to miraculously open these doors, we need to build a body of evidence ourselves, and then have them try to refute the evidence that's clearly there.
The government will never have a formalized disclosure. That doesn't exist. What has happened is a type of disclosure, in that we now have social acceptance, right? How did that happen? Well, that happened through several different channels. It happened through, the release of TTSA's, introduction of Lou Elizondo, New York Times picking up Tom DeLonge's research with TTSA and publishing that. Then it was senators coming forward. Then it was pilots, and then it was intellectual scientists, Avi Loeb. So it's been all of these things that have kind of coalesced to create this natural threshold of belief, right? This populist belief now is. So when I was a kid, if you talked about UFOs, 8 times out of 10 people would laugh at you. They'd be like, that's ridiculous. I honestly, even people with little scientific knowledge or interest in the subject matter, most people will say, yeah, they're real. But what is really startling is that we were never allowed that moment of awe. The moment of awe that we always have dreamt about never happened. And so because that awe never happened, we still are stuck in this notion that disclosure hasn't happened. But that's not true. Disclosure has happened and woven into the populist narrative. It's why we're speaking about this now. It's why publications, it's why scientists are creating coalitions. It's why government is creating committees. It's here. We need to all allow the awe for ourselves. To really accept the fact we are not alone in this universe, whether or not these entities are mechanical or AI, stemming from some sort of weird AI sentience or biological, and it doesn't really matter. It truly doesn't matter. We're not alone. What it is they want, clearly it's pretty benign. I mean, aside from people saying that they, were abducted, the fact that they came back alive, I mean.
Yeah, they never throw them out the airlock. I've said that for 2 years on the podcast, right? They don't.
And that's if you believe everybody. And I personally am, I'm a staunch skeptic, and I still am a believer, but I always take the route of initial healthy skepticism. I try really hard not to be a cynic. And that's what happens to a lot of intellectuals who get rooted in a belief system. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is a perfect example of this. At once heralded as a great voice for the scientific endeavor, has now become a laughing stock because he cannot allow his cynicism to let it go. Healthy skepticism is an important part of this topic.
Mhm.
You cannot believe everything you read. I'm sure both of you are extremely well read on the topic. If you believed everything you read, we'd have lizard people knocking on our door at every moment.
Yeah.
Right? But if you deny everything as a cynic, you're left looking like a fool.
Well, he
And
was
that's
a pupil of Carl Sagan, and Carl Sagan was a strong, adamant person that, it's impossible for civilization to come see us.
I have a hypothesis, and Carl Sagan actually was not always. He early in his career, he was a big proponent in the universe was propagated with life and complex life and intelligent life. And then at some point he made a pivot. And so what we've seen is Neil deGrasse Tyson and some other people have done similar things. And what this tells me, I may be wrong here, but my knowledge of how these things work and operate as someone who's signed NDAs, once you're read into something, they have you.
Mm-hmm.
You no longer can talk about it. You can't infer about it unless you're like given some sort of leeway. So he, it, who knows, maybe Carl Sagan was read into it and sat on a think tank about the phenomenon. And due to that, he could no longer advocate for it.
Right.
Perhaps that was part of it. Perhaps that's what happened with Neil deGrasse Tyson, because who do these administrators go to when they need assistance on the greatest scientific problems? They go to the most public scientists,
Yeah.
the people who are the most intelligent. The presidents went to Einstein when they needed questions answered. And it's not far-fetched that some of these scientists were read into something.
Yeah.
And due to that, can no longer, no matter what, discuss it in terms of a reality. So, that's possible. Or it's possible he's just so foolish that he will not allow for the logic to sink in.
Well, even on his TV show, he's on a spaceship going through space and other planets. I
Yeah.
mean, that's quite hypocritical, if you ask
what's
me,
interesting
right?
is that spaceship in that CGI is very accurate to how a craft operating these type of fields might look.
Right.
You'd have a seamless, very curved kind of craft.
So just in closing here, I had a question for you. What can you tell us about the buzz behind the scenes right now in the UFO world? Like, I know there's certain things you're not allowed to talk about, but is there anything coming up that we get to look forward to? Is there momentum going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of?
Where are they
Yeah.
keeping the aliens, man? Just tell us. Where are they keeping them?
If I knew, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. That's for sure. The buzz is really, what you see, what is being propagated on all these podcasts, all the interviews you read. There's really nothing in the background aside from, these committees and the coalition, which I told you what, kind of what they're doing, what their goal and purpose is. You do have James Webb, and you have some other instrumentation that's being pointed to the celestial bodies to kind of search for things. NASA's just come on board. There really isn't anything secretive right now that I'm aware of or being held back from discussing outside of my NDAs and work with corporations in the past. People to really keep an eye on, are the pilots that have witnessed these things.
Yeah.
the scientists that are involving themselves with the coalition, companies that are working on advanced technologies, so quantum computing, material science, propulsion techniques. These are all things that I believe. So, I really think that we're going to see a trend in government-backed research of reverse engineering the observed phenomenon. So since we don't have access directly to the technologies that we're observing, what's going to happen is that programs and even companies with high amounts of financial backing are going to attempt to reverse engineer what is being observed. So you start with an observation and you say, how could that be done?
Right.
Okay. So what, it would take this type of material. How do we obtain that type of material? Okay. Where do we get our power generation? Okay. How do we do this? So this kind of reverse engineering through the market, I think is going to take place. And I think we'll see like government-backed grants for companies that are willing to kind of tackle these problems.
Nice.
That's kind of my forecast for what's to come in the next 10, 15 years.
Almost like a DARPA extension.
Yeah. Well, you see the Air Force had, in the last handful of years has done it's called the AF Works, where they directly work with companies and ventures who are either providing a service or a technology that may benefit the Air Force. So they're interfacing directly now with entrepreneurs, which I believe is a really intelligent way. It used to be just backhand lobbying was the only means. And they quickly saw that in the 21st century that they were missing out on a ton of technologies and goods and services and intellectual property that they could access more if they just went public with their interests. So you get these situations. The Space Force is also, does a similar type of event where they host for companies to kind of pitch ideas and stuff. So yeah, it really is kind of the government is happy to give money to companies who can provide answers to what they're observing.
Right.
It really boils down to that.
And puts them ahead of the game, right? That's another thing about
Well,
this
that's
technology.
the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And anyone, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know
no
you
worries.
are on limited time. Anyone who is high up in a military branch or in an administration who makes a claim that these are could even the claim that they could be foreign technologies, they're lying.
Yeah.
Because they're exposed to more cutting edge technology than I am. And I have a great deal of exposure. And what I can say is that no company or government has the capabilities to do this. It's not possible. It's just not possible. And it wouldn't make sense in a strategic economic sense because they would be utilizing this. So anybody who's saying that this could be adversarial, it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. And they're lying through their teeth, and they know it because they know what the capabilities of current technology is. Doesn't matter what country. There are limitations based on just pure science and engineering that are unable to be done.
Right.
They would have to be so significantly further advanced that they would not even resemble the society that is alive today. Right. So it's just it's a smoke screen. They don't know what it is. Well, they do and they don't.
If we're dealing with a class 2 civilization, to us, whatever it is that they do appears like magic. We can't figure it out. It's just, it's amazing.
Well, we have an idea, right? I don't think anything is magical. I don't think we need to induce time travel or time dilation. I don't think we need to induce higher states of consciousness, while that may be part of it. I think that everything can be explained through sufficiently advanced technologies.
Yeah.
Given enough time, technology and material science can perform every single one of these observables, right? We can theorize on that. We know how this could work. Just because we don't have the manufacturing capabilities or the materials right now, it does not mean they knew we could fly 400 years ago. They tried, they knew it would be possible. We just hadn't kind of stumbled upon the right formula yet, until the Wright brothers figured it out. But we knew we could do it. And back then, we wouldn't say that flying was, only for gods, or maybe some people would, but I don't think everyone would. They see birds flying. Anyway, my point is that it's happening quickly. People are researching this stuff. Money is being spent in the background on this. And I kind of leave with the same statement every time.
Right.
People, governments, companies, they're spending money on this stuff. This is real. This is real. Anyone who's telling you that they don't think it's a phenomenon, they're either lying to you or they're just rooted in cynicism, which is sad, because they're not allowing themselves the moment of awe. So I wish we could all take that collective moment and embrace our reality and move on and move forward to a much better future. Well
said. Louis, do you have any final questions for our guest today?
No, we'll wish Michai Morin a very warm welcome again, and thanks for being on our show. It's nice to have somebody with the breadth of knowledge that you have firsthand, because of obviously your training, but what you do on a day-to-day basis, people you speak to. And when you're an enthusiast, you're motivated to kind of feed that, right? You thirst for it. You're like a sponge. So I think the movement is better because of people like yourself, and you're definitely you're contributing to the common good, and you're one of the good guys. So thanks for being on our show.
Thank you, gentlemen. I sincerely appreciate it. Let's do it again in the future, and maybe touch base on some new material that's come.
Sounds good.
You are always welcome on this podcast, my friend.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.